time in many students' lives where they just want to do better in school. So maybe they didn't have a great semester or a great midterm, or maybe it's just a brand new year. But either way, they tell themselves that they want to do better in school, and that they're going to work harder, and that they're going to study more. The problem is the first test is coming up and they're studying harder and they're working harder, and then the test results come back and they end up having pretty much the same grade that they had before. And the reason for this is basically they didn't really change any of the habits they did. They just started doing more of them. So they studied harder and worked harder, but they didn't actually study smarter. So when this happens, oftentimes students end up just giving up because they feel like, oh, school's not right for them, or they're just not smart enough, or they're just not good in that particular subject. When really what needs to change is the way that they study. There's this famous quote where it's, if you always do what you've always done, then you're always going to get what you always got. The whole premise of that is, if you're doing more of something in a non-effective way, then the results are really not going to change. You're just going to be doing more of that thing that ends up making it so you don't end up getting that goal that you want of better grades and of learning more. The following is what science says is the best way to study, as well as some things that I've just kind of picked up along the way. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the fact that you need to limit distractions when you're studying. Your brain can only do so many things at one time. If you don't believe me, next time you try to do a math problem, try to recite the alphabet backwards out loud. Or even easier, try to pat your head and rub your belly at the same time. Your brain is designed to only do one thing at one time. Many students think that they can multitask, but what's really happening is you're not doing two things at once. Your brain is just switching back and forth really quickly, so it seems like you're doing one thing at a time. So while you're studying, you might be also texting a friend and thinking that you're being able to do both of those things at the same time, but in reality, you're not putting that much focus on the study, and your brain is not actually encoding that information as well as it could be because it's doing other things as well. So that being said, you do not want to study in front of the TV. You don't want to study with your cell phone now. Ideally, you want to choose a quiet place to study where there's not many visual distractions and there's not many auditory distractions. Libraries are designed for this exact purpose. This is why people are not allowed to talk too much in a library, and this is also why libraries don't try to use these bright, crazy colors, because they want it to be as least distracting as possible so you can focus on what's in front of you, which is hopefully what you're studying. If you are going to listen to music while you study, try to listen to arrhythmic music. If you listen to things that have beats to it, oftentimes what your brain is doing is trying to put those rhythms together. So you want things more like classical music that doesn't have a strong rhythm that would distract your brain from what it's trying to learn. If you're going to use your computer to study, that's totally fine, but try to follow what I call the one tab rule. Have one tab open at one time. Oftentimes what students do when they're studying is they'll have their Facebook open, they'll have their Twitter open, they'll have their SoundCloud open, and then they'll also have whatever they're studying open. And as they're studying, they're seeing those other tabs, and it's distracting them from doing what they're supposed to be doing because they want to really quickly check what's on Facebook or see if anyone retweeted what they just tweeted. And what happens with this is you end up having a less focused learning environment when really you're supposed to be just focused on that one tab. So I call it the one tab rule. Only have one tab open at one time. If you have to do something else, then work within that one tab. We are social beings. Recent technology has made us actually socialize even more. We can talk to our friends and be connected to them even more. In order to stay on top of your studies, unfortunately, that socializing might have to be sacrificed every now and then so that you can focus more on your studies. Try to anticipate these distractions that you might give yourself. Try to anticipate when you're going to be wanting to socialize with friends, when you're going to want to be socializing with family. The more you anticipate it, the better off you'll be able to react to it when it's actually happening. Try to find patterns of when you're actually being distracted as well, so that way you can help break that pattern and focus more on the studying. Make studying a habit. Like any habit, you need to stick to a routine. Set a specific time and place to study each day. Add the event to your calendar so you are reminded. Setting a specific time to study primes your brain, which over time will make studying easier to do and easier to manage. Try to focus study times on smaller chunks rather than one big long session. What this ends up doing is organizes the information in your brain based on those each individual study chunks that you did. If you do it all at once, your brain basically has trouble kind of mixing that all together and organizing it. So if you actually break down your studying into chunks, it actually encodes it in your brain in an easier way for you to recall it easier and to make sense of it. Also, make sure you're organized with everything you need. This includes books, notes, flashcards, a computer, etc. Eliminate any reasons for you not to study by making sure you always have those things organized ahead of time. Because when it comes down to it, you're going to end up wanting to look for any excuse not to study. Be positive. Some students think that if they don't understand something in the first seconds after they're seeing it, then they're just never going to understand it. Take your time with learning a topic. Chances are, if whatever you're studying is complicated, it's meant to take a long time for you to actually understand and grasp it fully. Let the learning come naturally and don't try to force it. Getting upset while while studying will essentially cause your study time to be wasted. Remember, your brain can only do so many things at once. If you're wasting part of your brain on being upset with yourself that you don't understand something as fast as you would like, then it's going to make it that much harder to actually learn that topic. Break it up. This is probably the most cliched study tip, but again, research has shown that studying in small chunks is way more valuable than studying for this one big long session. Based on the Pomodoro technique, you want to take 5-minute breaks every 25 minutes of studying. And when I say breaks, I don't mean just not studying or going on Facebook or doing something that's like kind of mindless, but like get out of your chair, walk around, stretch out a little bit, try to invigorate your brain, try to increase blood flow to your body, so that way that your brain is more primed and more energetic and ready to go. When you're taking a break, don't just end up sitting there the whole time, because it's just going to make you more catatonic and make studying a little bit harder to do. Your brain is basically encoding information when you're taking those breaks. So it's almost like your brain is making little file folders for every little study chunk that you did. So it's kind of important to study a certain section of a concept and then finish that section out and then take a break, because then your brain is going to put it basically in a file folder for you to be able to easily retrieve later. So rather than cramming one folder with a bunch of stuff, it's going to put a workable amount of information in that folder so it's easier for you to access and manage. Cramming is the most popular way of studying for most students, but it's been shown to be the least effective. Again, you're going to need those breaks to help your brain encode that information. While we're also on the topic of rest, sleep is very, very, very important in terms of studying. Research has shown that if you have sleep debt, which means you owe your body sleep because you didn't get enough sleep a certain night, what ends up happening with sleep debt is it can affect your memory and reasoning for up to 4 days. So although you were cramming for 1 day and you think that's going to help you, your reasoning and memory isn't going to be at its full capacity for up to 4 days, which can really affect how you do in the studying as well as how you do in the learning in the class in general. Your brain puts together a lot of the information that you were studying while you're sleeping. Believe it or not, rereading notes is not studying. Rereading notes focuses more on recognition than understanding. So as you're reading these notes, you're not actually putting any puzzle pieces together, you're just simply looking at the puzzle pieces. And what ends up happening in many students' brains is they feel more comfortable with it, they recognize it, and they get this feeling that they actually learned it and actually understand those concepts, when in reality they were just recognizing it. So it gives that false sense of actually understanding what you're doing. And oftentimes students will say, well, I studied my notes, I don't know how I did so poorly on the test. And the reason for that is because you felt that you were understanding this stuff, even though you really weren't. So instead of rereading your notes, what I try to tell students to do is try to present your notes to somebody else, maybe someone that doesn't actually understand anything about that specific subject. So present it like it's a speech. And like any speech, you don't want to just be reading off your note cards or reading off your notes the whole time. You want to actually be able to look at your notes to kind of reference and jog your memory about something, but you should be able to explain it using your notes as just a reference. Do not actually read off the notes. Now, if you don't have anyone to present to, what you could also do is just use your phone or just use any other camera and just record yourself, present it to yourself, and then play that back. If you sound like you actually know what you're talking about, then chances are you probably have a firm grasp and firm understanding of the concepts. If it's kind of iffy and you kind of hear yourself saying a lot of ums and a lot of thinking is going on, rather than just kind of explaining what's going on during that actual recording, then you can kind of explain to yourself what you need to work on, what you need to study a little bit more of. Don't study too much, and yes, that is possible. Well, it's not a common habit for many students. Many students think that if you study a lot, then you're actually more prepared for a test. The problem with this is the longer you study, the more bored you get with that topic. People's minds tend to wander when they're bored, and so they're less focused on the actual studying because they were focused more on the study time. So focus on what you're studying rather than how much time you think you need to study. Prioritize your studies. Always study the most difficult subjects first. This is smart because if you study them first, your brain's going to be more fresh in understanding those. And since they're harder topics, you're going to need all the brain resources that you have to be able to understand and firmly grasp that difficult subject. Many times students tend to focus on the easier subjects and putting off that harder stuff for the end. Meet your challenges head on and try to take away any excuses to put off that harder material. Have a specific study goal. When I used to study, I used to be like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to study, and I would just study aimlessly, not actually even thinking about what I was studying or what I need to work on. Aimlessly studying like this does little to help the brain connect concepts together. Instead, you get a mix of basically everything that you're looking at rather than tying anything together and learning more deeply. When you're sacrificing your free time to study, make sure you have a specific rationale or a specific purpose to that time. You should be able to answer the following question. By the time I am done studying, I want to have mastered the following concepts. And then just fill in the blank with whatever concepts that you want to actually master. Studies have shown that writing down goals makes them more likely to get done. Focus on those study goals and you will accomplish your ultimate goal of a great understanding and grade in that course. Teach others. Believe it or not, when you teach other people those same topics that you're trying to learn, you actually end up learning those topics more. In an educational study, half of the students in the class were told that they have to teach other people the concepts that they're learning, while the other half did not. When both groups took a test on those same concepts, the students that were expected to teach other people those concepts scored better than students that were not expected to teach others. Students that teach others generally score higher on tests than others who are learning only for themselves. The reason reason for this is because when you're actually trying to teach something, you have to encode it in your brain into a coherent structure that actually makes sense to you so that it can make sense to somebody else. We often don't do this when we're not expected to be able to teach something to someone else. This organization and prioritization of concepts helps students themselves understand those concepts. This is also the reason why teachers are so smart. Memorizing might be a necessary evil. Memorizing has become obsolete with the ubiquity of information. With information being at anyone's fingertips at any time, there's pretty much not a reason to memorize anymore. Now, this is true when looking up reference information such as atomic masses of elements, mathematical equations, authors of books, what year some war happened, etc. However, vocabulary is an important thing to know for communication of ideas as well as connecting understanding. Research shows that memorizing certain parts of a concept help your brain tie concepts together in a more effective way. According to science, one of the best ways to memorize is the classic flashcards method. The reason for this is because flashcards engage active recall. Rather than passively reading a question and answer or a vocab and definition, your brain is practicing recalling that information in an active format. You literally have to flip the card over to make sure that you're actually right. Flashcards can also be repeatedly randomized and spaced out constantly, working out the brain and organizing information. Flashcards also help students focus on metacognition, which is basically just thinking about your own thinking. When practicing with flashcards, students are essentially grading themselves and the validity of their answer. They're thinking about to what extent their own understanding compares to the other side of the card. Studying, especially when it's subjects that you're not particularly interested, can be boring and mentally exhausting. However, if academic goals are achieved, studying well can be one of the most rewarding acts that you can do to self-improve not only your grades, but also your understanding of the world and your love of learning. Studying does suck, but not as much as failing. Will it be easy? Of course not. But will it be worth it? Absolutely. I hope this video helps you achieve your goals of learning and studying better.